In this first of a three-part series, I'm going to take you through the process in which I go through into making a really cool little diorama for my models. Welcome back to the channel with me, David. Now, I have been wanting to film this type of video for ages. Originally, it wasn't scheduled to come out so soon. I wanted to practice it a little bit, get some experience under my belt, and then I was going to release it in a couple of months' time. However, with lockdown, filming games over the internet with Andrew is extremely difficult and very, very stressful, I might add. And I didn't move out here all the way to the other side of the world to get more stress. The whole point was to have less stress in my life. So to that end, this is going to be a little mini three-part series of the design process in which I go through boards, and I will try and apply all of that stuff to a very small diorama, which I think hopefully will be very cool. The reason why I'm starting with a small diorama like this is because I need a bit of practice. And also, I'm extremely unorganized, which has been a massive failing of my efforts over the last few years. I've had loads of plans to do stuff, I start stuff, and I failed. So particularly when terrain is concerned, I've started 3 really big projects in the last 2 years, and all of them has failed. And it's because I've just not planned them enough, and I've just run out of time, energy, and money. And then all of that stuff I've purchased and brought and all that time I've spent prepping and starting to build the model has been wasted. It's just been chucked in the bin. So now this, for me, is a really good way of getting myself into building those much more big fixed boards rather than using all the loose sand and gravel. I want to build big 6x4 boards with some kind of permanent stuff in place, which I can then use to take to tournaments here in New Zealand in the future. And you can literally just rock up, pop the board out the back of the car and pop it on a table and not have to worry about aggregate and various bits and bobs. This diorama I'm going to build in this mini-series is a little bit of a hybrid version of that. And you'll see why, hopefully later on towards the end, why I've kind of made it a bit of a hybrid. However, it's not all doom and gloom. I have been successful in building a couple of fairly decent sized boards. The first one which springs to mind was the Tizca board, which I built for Dan and Pete for their Thousand Suns versus Space Wolves. It was the final game in a 4-part series, I think I want to say. Massive staircase, the side of a pyramid, a glass pyramid with a letterbox opening, and then stuff comes down, and then the Space Wolves came up. So that was a really cool board, and definitely sparked something off of me to do that. It took a week of holiday to get that sorted, but it was done, and it looked pretty cool. The second one was the board I built for Miles and Jack, Blood Angels versus Death Guard, and that's where I built sort of a central colonnade with a load of steps leading to large kind of bombed out buildings, and there was a crashed Thunderhawk in there as well. So that was a really cool board. Pros and cons to that one was that it was built out of kitchen tiles, which is nothing wrong with that. It works great, but is extremely heavy, and it was actually really complicated to put together because there were so many elements in it. And there was a couple of times I wanted to use it in a board for some guests coming over to film the channel, but I absolutely abandoned it because I was just like, oh, I don't know how this goes together. It looks rubbish. I started breaking tiles and they got put away and got knocked. The whole thing got damaged. So really good for like a one-piece build or a one-time build rather, but just not very good for the future. It was too heavy, too cumbersome, and I had to use a tile cutter to cut the tiles to length. Not ideal, so it made an absolute mess and just a waste of time in the end. Right, that's the preamble. Let's get on with this board. So the first thing for me in particular is planning. So I needed to be really, really strict with myself about how I plan this. And also as well, I watch a lot of stuff on YouTube, and although the end result of the models that the guys are building are fantastic, I've just sometimes feel that there's not enough detail, and I'm not a fast learner by any stretch of the imagination. So I like things to be spelt out to me quite simply, and I can't be alone in that. You know, we're all not professional model builders, so sometimes, you know, if you've got someone like me that takes the time to kind of explain the process and how it all goes together, or how I've put it together at least, you can take some inspiration on that, knowing the full process. To that end, I've come up with 7 headings which I think are really key when trying to design a particular board or a diorama. The first one is reason. Why are you building this board? Well, a couple of reasons for me. First one is practice. This is going to be a much smaller test piece for a much larger build, which I hope to build in the next couple of months when I can get access to the hardware store to buy materials with. But also as well, it's some more content to fill until we can get back to filming games. However, don't worry, these videos will continue. When the games start rolling out, these will be filmed in addition and will be included in like board builds and various other bits and bobs. Inspiration. I think Facebook and Instagram is the absolute best place for inspiration. So mainly the inspiration for this board comes from Mike Fell-Handed. He's got some amazing White Scars army, and a few months ago he built a load of bases from laser cut MDF, layered them up, filled them with milliput, and then etched or sculpted flagstones into them. He then cast them and then sold them into the community. A load of people bought them and they painted them up. So I think Mike's bases look absolutely fantastic, and it just goes to show with a little bit of, I guess, technology, because he uses a laser cutter, but there's no reason why you couldn't use foam core to cut it out with a knife and use a compass and various bits and bobs. So they can be built exactly the same way, and I think he used it to really great effect. And those bases that he made are absolutely fantastic. So this is based fairly similarly to that point. I've gone about it in a different way, and I just want to show you that process. Theme. There's only one theme running through this board build, and that's a staircase. I love a staircase, mainly because they add height and drama to a piece, but also most of the boards you see out there are played on fat mats, which are great, but they don't have any height to them. And there's only one, to my knowledge, staircase that's in Games Workshop's range, which is the Zone Mortalis staircase, which is great. There are, of course, Age of Sigmar scenery pieces, but blending the two together can get a little bit tricky. So you either go from this kind of ancient temple to a kind of very precisely cut staircase out of steel. There's kind of no in between. And, you know, if you wander around the places like York or Cambridge or somewhere like that, or Scotland is another fantastic example, or Wales, you know, these really old cities, they've got massive flagstones and paving stones and cobble streets and that sort of thing. And I absolutely see that in the 30K universe. So that's the kind of look I'm going for. Keep it simple. Now, this has always been my failing. I've always tried to build something too complicated, way beyond my ability, and it's always ended in fail. So I've got a CNC machine. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on, but I know how to use that quite confidently now, and I've planned everything out. So for me, this is quite a simple build, and I really hope to carry it off. Materials. Now, I've been really restricted in the materials that I can use because I don't have access to a hobby shop. All I've got is the materials that I shipped over with me from England. So I'm using a very tight range of materials. I'm using plasticard, MDF, and some terrain which I've got left over, and of course sand and rocks from the beach. So, you know, if you're worried that this video is going to be, you know, the material, it's going to be too expensive, you're not going to be able to afford it, that's not the case. This is a super cheap build. Organized. Now, as I mentioned, I am a super messy person and I'm fairly unorganized, but I've promised myself if I'm going to build these big boards or these small dioramas, I need to get a bit more organized and I need to be tidy. So I have made a couple of aids, which I'll show you later on when they come into play. I've tried to plan things out. I've made a list of stuff. I costed everything. And I've given myself 3 weeks to film this, obviously, because it's 3 episodes for you guys for the next 3 weeks. So I've divided this up into kind of the base build or the framing of the whole thing. Then we're going to go into detailing, and then we're going to go into painting, and then the army shots at the end. So a really simple, organized process. I have everything in stock that I need, and it should just be a case of figuring it out, sticking it all together, and then giving it some paint. Finally, I touched on it in the previous one, but planning. I've made a really basic drawing, which you'll see on the screen there. It's a super easy drawing, but it gives me my rough measurements, which then allows me to work out if I've got all the material in stock, and also allows me to cost the project. So I'll do all of those costings at the end of the video. I'm not going to worry about that just now, but it shows me exactly what I need and how much of it I need. All right, it all started with this drawing. So we'll have a look at this drawing here. You can see that I've put the Trias armoured conveyor in there, and I've made this staircase. So I knew that I kind of wanted pavement, road, pavement, 5 steps, kind of like a mid-level to it, and then continue with 3 steps until we get into a building. So that's roughly all I wanted. I then drew the dimensions up that I needed. So it's not very big, but it's big enough to get stuck into. If you start with something too small, it just gets really, really fiddly and you'll end up just giving up. But if it's too big, it's going to cost way too much money. You've then got to store the thing as well. Either that or you just bin it, and then it's kind of like a waste of time. So I've made it a reasonable size that it can just sit in a shelf or in a cupboard somewhere, and I can drag it out if I need it. I am going to make this so the models are removable, and that's because I want to try this out with some solar auxiliary later when I get them through on my shipping, and then put it all together. And then I'll get some more solar and I will then glue them down. So it will work for Space Marine, solar auxiliary, Thalax, Castellax, whatever you've got. Once I was happy with my diagram, I then transferred this to my CAD program, which I use for the CNC machine. Now, don't worry, you don't need a CAD program and you don't need a CNC machine for this. The only reason why I've done it this way is because the stuff I'm going to build later will need to be built on the CNC machine, because I need multiples of it and I need repetition really fast instead of having to build it by hand all the time. So if I can get the basic bits done on the CNC, I need to spend a couple of hours drawing it, and then in the future I just push a button or load the machine, push a button, and it does all the hard work for me, and I can just sand it, stick it together, and go from there. So that's the only reason why I'm using my CNC machine in MDF. You could easily use foam core because we're going to clad it in plasticard anyway, or you can use thin sheets of polystyrene, which you can buy from any model shop. The material I would have preferred to have used is Foamex. It's like a plastic material. It's quite not that squishy, but you can definitely put indentations in it, which will be much more helpful later on. And you wouldn't have to clad it in MDF. Have to clad it in styrene or plasticard. But I haven't got any, and it's really expensive. So MDF for me is the cheapest option. If you've got a circular saw or a table saw, you can easily make this out of MDF, and it's so much cheaper. However, there's obviously an issue there with cutting your fingers off. I don't want you to do that. So, you know, foam core or Foamex with a scalpel and a knife and a ruler just works just as well. The way I built this in the CAD program, I built it as a linear structure, as a straight structure, just put lines using the guides. And then after that, I filled it in with boxes. So once I had the shape on my drawing in the CAD program, I made it slightly larger in the area that I used it, and then I rotated it. I think it was about 30 degrees or 25, 26, 27 degrees. And then I cut around it with a box, and then that welded my shape in place. Now, the reason why I did it at an angle is because most boards are built square on, and I didn't want it square on. I wanted it to be a little bit more interesting at an angle, and you'll see that when I start to assemble the model in a second. So to make it a little bit more interesting, I built it at an angle, almost like this angle here on the Triaros. It just looks a lot more interesting than just straight on, which to me is a bit boring. Once that was done, all I had to do was load the CNC machine with the wood, push the button, and the CNC machine cut it all out. Now, it worked out really, really well. You know, all I had to do was just sand the edges of each of these pieces of MDF, and then I just assembled it. And thankfully, my calculations worked out. All bar one. I had to recut one piece because the bit of wood I put it on was too short, and so I had to recut it. It was this piece just here. So if we just mop the model up really quickly, really important to get this testing phase done all the time. If I angle it slightly as well, I think that's probably the best position for you guys to have a look. Got some Thalax here. Obviously, they're not going to fit on the stairs, but as I said, it's not a full diorama in the sense that the model's going to be glued to the board. This is just, again, a test piece, and we're going to use solar for it later on anyway. So there's that. Now that looks pretty cool to me. It does look very boring right now. I totally agree with you, but we are going to add some extra elements to it to make it a little bit more interesting. The first one being this piece of terrain from Unreal Wargaming Scenery. Now, I'm not sure if Griff is still selling these at the moment. I think they are due for re-release. Now, the reason why I love these is because they're simple. They're not full of skulls. There's not too much detail. They're really simple, and they don't detract from the models. They're that grey backdrop against the lightly coloured models that we've got here. So I'm just going to angle this a bit more so you can see it. Now, this is a building I had in my collection. I'm going to tear it up and rebuild it in a particular orientation that I want. But I want the archway to be in the centre of the piece, and obviously I need it to extend beyond the line here. So what I've got to do is I've got to break this off here, and then reposition these pieces so I get a full length of building on the top there. And then we're going to put some detail in the back, some detail at the front, and that's basically it. So that's our roughing out of the whole piece. This is a really good time to work out if it all works as well, and I think it will do once we're there. The vehicle really fills the space, and there's a little bit of room for some debris on the front and back of the vehicle. We might even put a manhole cover in here or something, which we can use from the pipeline set from Games Workshop. And this just allows the space. Now, if anything, I think it's probably a bit too big actually. I think you could at least chop another 100 mil off it, but it's a really good medium-sized piece here to get my teeth stuck into, so that's why I went the larger size. But also as well, I think with the tri-arch armored conveyor, I didn't want it to be too tight, and it just gives it plenty of breathing space to either move it forwards or backwards, or maybe just place it in the middle there. So that's the effect that I'm going for. I think it's going to be really cool once it's been clad in plasticard and all the texture's been put on and everything else. So that is what we're looking for. First things first, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by gluing all of these pieces down so it's one solid mass. Now I'm going to use a combination of PVA glue and screws. Now I could build it just using PVA glue, but I just really want it to be really solid. So I'm gonna glue it, and then I'm gonna screw each one or two or three times just to really help it bond, and then I'll do each level as we go up. I'm not worried about if I put some damage onto the model that I'm going to dig into the screws, because they're going to be well out of the way, and plus I'm not going to dig too much into this building. I want this building to be fairly intact. Although the building is damaged itself here, you know, we can just imagine that there's an important asset, either a piece of equipment or an important person that's hiding out in this building, and this unit of phalanx and a tri-arch have been sent to recover that item, artifact, or that important person. So they've screeched along the road, they've stormed up the stairs, and they're going to enter in via the entrance here, and whatever happens in there happens in there. So that's the kind of look I'm going for, and I wanted it to be fairly intact and not too damaged. So the stairs will have a little bit of damage on them, a little bit of debris, but mainly the damage from the building, so it'll kind of trickle down the steps a little bit. So we're not going to go too crazy, we're not going to dig massive craters into the model, we're going to leave it fairly immaculate. All right, that was exhausting. Did you spot the mistake I made right at the beginning where I laid like the third step? I PVA'd the entire top of it. I don't need to do that, of course, because the next piece starts further back. So not cool. Remember that one for the future. It doesn't matter though, because we are going to give it a coat of PVA glue later just to seal it all in nicely. And we're also going to clad it with plastic cards. It doesn't really matter, but you know, for future, if you don't need to do it, then that's a good reason why. Also, if you are not building that out of MDF, you can build it out of foam core, as I mentioned already, which is available at any hobby store around the world. When it gets wet, or you put lots of PVA glue, it gets quite moist and absorbs a lot of that moisture and starts to curl up. So if I was you, I'd get a nice heavy piece of wood, stick a layer together and let it glue, let it set. It's going to take a lot longer, but it will stop that model from curling up as well, which will help loads. But also, if you've got a really sturdy base, like a nice thick bit of MDF or a bit of wood to go on, start with that, then glue your layers, and that will also stop the curling of the foam core, which will help. If you're using Foamex, you don't need to worry about that. Just excessive heat will start to curl those edges ever so slightly. I found that out to some unfortunate circumstances and stuff I had delivered. So yeah, so just be careful of that. MDF, just got to worry about getting it wet. You're probably saying, well, actually, you know, you're putting a lot of PVA glue in it, but it does soak in and it does dry hard, so so that does help. So I'm just going to do that now to give the whole staircase a nice coat, and it will really get in between where the steps go on top of each other. It will just help fill that edge, and then we'll give it a light sand, and then it's ready for cladding the plasticard. All right, that is it done. I've not been too liberal. I want it to keep it fairly thin coating of glue. I am going to sand this back, but we'll do that in the next stage because we're going to coat it in the plasticard, and we'll leave that for part 2. So we're going to put this off to the side. I'm going to have a clean up, and then we're going to start prepping the building that will go on top of the top step. I mentioned earlier that I've been making stuff on my CNC machine, and I've made these really cool little hobby trays. They're super basic, so you know, they're not very extravagant, but they make me be so much more organized. Like I'm one of these guys that will put stuff down and then it will just vanish. But if I've got something with a little pocket in it, you can just keep it all in one. So this has helped me loads over the last couple of weeks. So I've made a ton more in a little racking system that they all just kind of fit in. So if I'm painting Death Guard one day, I'll pull a tray out. It's got all the Death Guard bits on there, all the paints I need. And then I'll pull out another one for Solar, and I'll pull another one out for whatever else I'm doing. Titanicus as well, I'm doing at the moment, loads. Anyway, so this is my little hobby tray. It helps me keep organized, and it is essential. So I've already popped the building off, the level, so we don't need that anymore. Now, I don't normally cannibalize buildings like this for a model. I hate doing it. However, I know I've got a ton more of these coming in my sea freight, which will be here hopefully in a couple of weeks. So I don't mind butchering some models up. So this was the only one I could spare with a doorway, and I really wanted a doorway because that's the focal point to the model almost. You know, that's where the phthalates are going. They're going into that building through that doorway for a reason. So that's what I wanted to do here. Now on the back, it's got a load of scum and all sorts of bits and bobs from the floor level there. I will put the level back in, but we're going to rebuild this first, and then we'll have a look at where the level goes in, because instead of having a corner piece now, we've got a straight a level almost. So I might not put it back in. Haven't made up my mind yet. All right, let's get on to it. Now, these Unreal Wargaming Studios buildings are fantastic, but they are very, very heavy. They are solid resin. So when I built these, I put 3 or 4 pins in there to keep them tight, because they are so solid. And you'll see that in a second when I pull this apart. Yeah, so if you can see there in the top-down camera, I've got a load of 1mm nails. You can buy these from any hardware store. They're called panel pins. They're 1mm, and I just chop the heads off with a pair of pliers or snips, and then they're perfect for that job. So obviously this is made at a right angle. I've now got to move these, re-drill them to make them one long line. So I'm going to try and reuse these pins because I don't have that many to spare, and I can't get to a hardware store. So I'm going to try and reuse these, and if I bend them too much, I'm going to cut them down because they don't need to be that long. I mean, that's really excessive, but I was obviously trying to make them last longer, and it has worked. The longer they are, the better they stay together, because these have been knocked around, shipped over the side of the world, and they've been built hundreds of times, and they've been fine. Okay, next thing to do now, I'm going to take some sandpaper and a knife and just clean up these edges. All right, that's the building's prep now. Now, one thing that's very exciting to me is that I've got my own Hoover. So we've got a Hoover for the house, but I've got my own Hoover in the garage. And I tell you what, it is way better than using a normal conventional Hoover. So I'll just Hoover this mess up and then we'll get back to it. Well, that's exciting. It's for me. Okay, all right, we've got our buildings. They're nicely, freshly prepped. I'm a bit worried that we've got enough length, but I'm worried that we might not be able to get this doorway central into the diorama. So let's have a quick look. We'll need our hobby tray. Oh, that works so well. Put your tools away, David. Always making a mess. I think that might be best for you guys if you have a head-on shot. Okay, so let's get conveniently out of the way. Now, of course, we're not going to measure that way. We're going to measure this way to keep in line with the piece. So it's 370. So 35, 185 is our center. Mark that on there. And then I don't really have a set square with me, so that's unfortunate. And then all we're going to do, I'm just going to draw a line down the back. There, like that. So that gives us our center. Oh, we might be okay. Now, you might want to use Games Workshop terrain for this, and the newer stuff, the taller stuff to accommodate the Primaris Marines is probably a really good idea because it is really detailed. There's quite a few skulls on it. However, you don't have to paint it with every single skull on, so you can paint it quite neutral, and I've seen some examples of that online and they do look fantastic. So I know I whinge about Games Workshop terrain, it's got too much skulls and stuff on, but that stuff is really good. I don't have any of that. I've only got this stuff, but I do love this stuff, and it will be consistent with the rest of my boards because we are using Grimdark terrain. Excuse me, not Grimdark, that's Adeptus Titanicus, and Real World Gaming Studios. So, oh, it's all going a bit wrong. So that's going to be my doorway. Now these buildings, they come with a bit of debris on the bottom of these bases. So I'm going to trim some of that back, but I am essentially going to lay a little bit of debris and stuff over the front, but not so much of it. And obviously we've got this piece here, and then this piece here. So I was a little bit worried that we weren't going to fill the entire length of it, but we are going to be absolutely fine, which is really good. Good. Of course. Now, one of the major problems we've got now is because I built it on an angle, we're going to have to chop these off at a decent angle as well. So that does create a lot more work, whereas if it was just kind of, if it was just straight, I could have just put them in a chop saw and chopped them down. I'm still going to do that, but then I'm going to have to sand the edges quite a bit to get the angle to make sure it looks like it's, because it will look a bit weird if it just hangs over. So that will be quite difficult to do, and that will take quite a long time. So it's just loads of, initially you're going to cut it with a chop saw or a hacksaw even, or something like that, even just a handsaw or a Dremel if you've got a Dremel, and then I can use a Dremel to just surface the edge. I've got like a little mouse hand sander, so hopefully I'll get some really harsh grit sandpaper on it and then just sand it over. But if you haven't got a little sander and a dust extractor, then you can just put a sheet of, what I used to do is I used to glue sandpaper onto a bit of wood or a surface, and then wait for the glue to dry, and then just sand it, and you can get a nice big sanding area without having to use these little sanding blocks, because sanding this on a sanding block would be quite annoying. So I think it's easy. You can just get a load of pressure and just push it down onto the surface. But I'm going to spend a few minutes on this, just kind of making sure it all lines up, and then I'm going to mark it out. All right, I've got my line about where I want to mark this. I know I said I'm going to clad it, and I am going to, but it's going to be the last bit of cladding I do. I'm going to do a floor design on this side. And obviously I want the grey, and then I want like quite a colourful floor design on here, which we'll do later in detailing. So I'm quite happy with where it is. So obviously haven't got to do anything with this one, but what I do need to do before I pin these two sections together, I've got to cut them to size. So a little bit tricky, but what I am going to do, I'm just going to turn this around, stick this back on to about there. That looks good. Offer this back up. It's not 100% straight, so I'll do that later. But I just want the rough dimensions for it now. And I'm just going to draw underneath the back side of this. So it's hard for you to see, but I can see it pretty well. I'm just going to reinforce that with my biro. So maybe you can see that on the top down, maybe not, but there's a line along there of which I've drawn. I'm going to do exactly the same. You know, these just have to be fairly rough. We want to get rid of most of the material on the chop saw or the hand saw, whatever we're using, and then we'll refine it later with a sander. Okay, that's really difficult to see, but I'll show you another technique which will be really helpful. What we can do is we can take some masking tape and stick it on the bottom of our building, like so. Offer it back up. It's obviously a bit harder to see where it goes on the old line, but it's about right. And there we go, we've got a line now. We'll just reinforce that. And then I'm just going to take my scalpel and just cut a lot of this back, because it's so easy for this tape to get caught and then it will tear off and then you've lost your line. But what I'll do is before I cut this, I'll do it now actually. I'll just etch it in with a scalpel. Mind your fingers, kids. There we go. And if I pull that off now, you can't see it, but I've got a really distinct line about where to make my cuts, and I can reinforce that a little bit by cutting a V section into it. And if I can get a photo of it, I'll do that and overlay it for you guys to see that. All right, so yeah, that fits beautifully. And I can see my notch now actually, and that's bang on. So we're really happy with it. Now, again, I'm not going to pin this until I've cut these. Now, I am going to cheat a little bit, unfortunately. I am going to use the chop saw, but I need to try and find a way to keep this flat. So I might cut it this side, and I'm going to cut it at an angle and match my angle up with this. So that will save me a lot of hassle. A little bit more dangerous, obviously, but, you know, we're all grown up, so we know how to use a chop saw. If you don't have that facility and you're using resin buildings, again, cut quite a big margin off it with like a little hobby saw or a hacksaw, and then refine it with a sander. Obviously, if you're using Games Workshop terrain, it's all plastic and that stuff cuts really nicely. But just be careful. Use a hobby saw and then refine it back with a sanding block. All right, now that did take less than a minute for me. So you can see it is beautifully chopped off there, a lovely angle. And do you know what? First time it fits. Ooh-wee tiger. That is pretty nice. It does need a tiny bit of sanding. It's not quite there. It needs a tiny bit taken off it, but it was as close. It needs about 1 millimeter taken off it. It's about as close as I could have got with the chop saw, because it was a bit spicy pulling it down. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll move on to the next piece. But we need our handy hobby tray. Nice. I've got my little mouse hooked up to my my Hoover with a dust extractor. Again, look, I know that some of you might not have all these crazy tools and stuff, but you know, I'm 41, 42 this year, next year rather. You know, I'm a certain age where, you know, you do stuff in the garage, you're putting up shelves, you're building benches and all sorts of bits and bobs for the missus. So, you know, you do end up with a reasonable collection of power tools and stuff. You know, this whole model can be built without any power tools, no MDF, no CNC machine. We talked about this, so please don't feel discouraged if you've not got all the gear, as it were. You know what they say, all the gear, no idea, right? That's me all over. All right, so where's my piece? Here it is. I'll turn on the dust extraction, I'll get sanding. All right, and I've just sanded that back with 80 grit sandpaper, so you get, you know, different grades of sandpaper, whatever on your thing. Let's push this back out the way. Pop this back in. It's a lot harder building a model sat down than it is standing up, I can tell you that much. All right, so let's put it back in our little markers. I am going to cheat just a little bit and scooch it over that way a tiny bit, just so I haven't got to spend half my life sanding this piece down. It's only gone over by a tiny bit. Yeah, I'm fairly happy with that, to be honest with you. Oh, actually, I had it in the wrong place. Aha! So if I push that back, oh, it's too good. Okay, much better, and it's in the right place now. Cool. So one thing I need to do though is I need to just take the edge off that. It goes up and then it bends off to a point. So I'm just going to take an edge off it with the sander again, same 80 grit. See, another good excuse of having a Hoover. It makes me a lot more tidy, which is good. I'm not cleaner. Nothing worse than you're cleaning Forge World models off and you've just got so much stuff and rubbish all over the shop. Okay. Yeah, it is slightly out. What I've done is I've just pushed the whole thing forward a little bit more, and that allows me to get that in nicely. That works really well. And when I build the perimeter around it later, you'll see that it will encompass that and it'll be quite nice. Okay, so I have moved the whole thing ever so slightly. Just some final adjustments. I think what would be handy at this stage is to draw one line straight along the whole thing so I can line the back edge of these buildings up together. So what I'll do is I'll use this as my starting point. I'll draw a line like so, and hopefully if I've got a nice long edge somewhere, I'll draw another line across the top of it. There we go, that's what I was looking for. So much for being organised. Now I know you think by this point, oh, this video's been going on for ages, it's a bit boring. Well, I just wanted to document everything. Like I said, so a lot of these videos, they go at quite a rapid pace and I'm a little bit slower. I run at a different slower speed. So I just wanted to make a video that even I could follow onto. So that's actually a lot better now having that line. So a line here, if you've got a defining line, is a lot easier to follow than the wiggly line which I made earlier. So I'm just making that corner line up. Yeah, that's a lot better. Now, one thing I have noticed is this building is not flat. So what it is now, I've got one section that's leaning forward, or that one's leaning back, and that one's leaning forward. So I'm gonna now just sand the bottom of these to try and get them a little bit level. Okay, I think that's the best I'm going to get it. I might use a little bit of green stuff when I come to fixing this down to just leveling it off nicely. And obviously I can't do that until I clad it in plasticard, but that's okay. Yeah, it does still lean a little bit, but we're gonna drill and pin it anyway. So that's the best I could get it, if I'm honest with you. So next thing, we're gonna move on to the other section. Now I am gonna cut this with a hobby saw because this was just far too close to the blade of the circular saw, and I didn't fancy losing a finger. So we'll pop that in place. Then that one, there, and then this one. Now, thankfully, it's only a little wedge, which gives us a huge, gives us much less of a task to do. So I am going to cut it from the bottom. Now, obviously, cutting resin, sanding resin, all that jazz. Be careful. Lungs and all that. Okay, well that's incredibly difficult to cut like that. I think it's a bit silly. I think I'm going to end up cutting my fingers off. I do have a Dremel, and I could use that, but I know not everyone has a Dremel, right? So I thought, well, we'll just cut it this way. Oh, that's perfect. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. Doesn't help my saw's not very good. It's quite a fine saw, and really I needed something with a bit more of an aggressive edge to it. But I mean, still cutting it fine, but would have been a lot easier. There we go, it's done. So we'll give it a bit of a clean up. These tools from Games Workshop are amazing. I use it for everything. And also as well, I used to use a scalpel. I still use a scalpel, but I use this more because with a scalpel, you can really cut into stuff, and you cut too much away. You end up cutting like little mini slithers into like a, you know, a Space Marine shoulder pad or like something quite smooth. And then you have to then fill it back in with green stuff. Whereas this, you know, unless you push really hard, you're not going to cause too much damage. So I do love using it. Okay, we're nearly there. We are nearly there. Oh yeah, that fits really nice. Really nice. Okay. Yeah, okay, so I'm really happy. It needs a little bit of fine tuning, but I'm not going to be able to do that until I pin it together, which I'll do next. Now, thankfully, the holes are already left in this piece here. However, again, I'm going to just reinforce them to make sure that they're free to work, which they are. Now, I remember when I built this, I did use my Dremel here, but I'm going to use the pin and vise set because, you know, I know not everyone's got a Dremel at home. So Dremel, quicker, easier, less pain on your joints and your hands, but you know, they cost 100 quid or whatever, which is quite expensive. So these are a little bit wonky. you know what, they're a bit too wonky to get in, so I'm just going to chop them down. Mind your eyes. Right, just a nice wad of glue on there. Pop it in. You want about half and half. So half of the pin goes into this section, then half will go into the other one. And don't worry about matching it up to the other one. We'll do that in a minute, but I'm just going to fill these with the pins. Right, we're done. So the next key thing now is we just need to make sure that these are standing perpendicular to our piece, because it'll make it a lot easier when we try to insert it into the other section. So I don't know if you can see that on camera, but all the pins, 2, 3, 4, 5 that I've put in are all perfectly perpendicular to the upright there. So that's exactly what we want. That looks really good to me. Can work with that. You know, I think 2 of them are a bit too long as well, if I'm honest. They don't need to be so substantial now, because obviously they're not, you know, they're not going to be picked up and moved around, because I pick all the stuff up like that. So we're going to move on to this side now. So what I do, and hopefully you can pick this up on the top-down camera. Look, if I try and organise myself a little bit more now, look. That's why I made the tray, you've got to use it. Okay. Oh, look at that. That is pretty impressive. There we go, there we go. All right, we made some space. Good. Now, of course, this is all on an angle. Sorry, we're not using that bit, we're using this bit. So we should really build it like this. So we want this leading edge to be right in the middle of this. That's just common sense, right? So it's a bit tricky, really. So I'm just going to line it up. You know, if it's not perfect, I'm not too worried about it, because, you know, it's not the end of the world. But that's pretty good. Now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to push down, make an impression with those pins. You know, and you might get 4 out of 5. You know what, they're getting them all. But by the time you drill a hole on the other 4, when you push them in slightly, the 5th one will come into contact with the thing, make an impression, you pull it back out again, re-drill it, or drill the 5th hole and then slam it in together. But test fit it and then glue it. So obviously I'd use a Dremel here, but I'll use the old pin and vise. Oh, my fingers are going to hurt tomorrow. I'm not as young as I used to be. You know, what some people do is they'll put like a daub of red paint on the end of it and then offer the 2 up together. You can do that as well. I just, for me, it's just an extra step. But also as well, I can see what I'm doing. Whereas, you know, when people use the paint daub technique, it generally tends to be like when you're using 2 halves together and one, like a ball and socket joint, one's obscured, so you can't see where it goes. So that's a really good time to use that. So that's probably the most well used version of that. Whereas, you know, as I said, I can see exactly where I'm going with this, so I don't need to use that method. The advantage of using a hand drill over a Dremel is that with the Dremel you can be really keen and you can push too hard and go through, you know, this pillar and into another bit and pop out the side of a window. Or, as I've done in the past, because these are 1mm drill bits, you can snap a drill bit. You just get so keen, and then the slightest angle and it spinning at 3, 4, 5,000 revolutions per minute, it snaps it off, and then you're left with half a drill bit in your model. And then you then have to get a Stanley knife or a big knife or something and try and cut a wedge in it to try and get your pliers in to tweeze the drill bit out. And then obviously you're then breaking drill bits, and it's an absolute nightmare. So in a way, using a drill bit, hand drill, is much better, but obviously it takes a lot longer. But you know, I'm sure you guys are hobby veterans. You know what you're doing, right? You don't break drill bits. I break loads. In my little toolkit, I've got about 15, 20 extra 1mm because I'm lazy and I end up always breaking them. It's not good. Okay, that is pretty good. Now I'm not gonna test fit all the way in because I know those holes are deep enough. And the way you can test that, you know, if you're not familiar with using this, is that you can stick it all the way in, pop your finger on the end, offer it up against your thing, and I know that my holes are all that deep and all of those will go all the way in. So let's glue it. So we'll put a good coating of glue around each peg or pin, whatever terminology you want to use. And then we'll dosh a bit on the side. Now, be careful when applying pressure here. I've done it in the past and I've applied too much pressure and I've actually bent the whole thing and I've broken it and I've had to pull all the pins out and then re-drill it. Not re-drill it, but put all new pins in. It's a nightmare. Oh, use those guns. Oh, there we go. I tell you what, I'm pretty happy with that. Just put a bit more pressure on it. Oh, yeah, that is a pretty good join and super solid. Really, really nice. All right, let's offer it up. Yeah, well happy with that. And because we've got those pins in there, you can still bend it a little bit. So it's mine's slightly off. I've even got it in the middle as well, which is always a bonus. Great. Cool, done. Next. Now, my holes are already left over from the other section which we put in there. So I'm just going to reinforce those holes, make sure that they work. There's a little bit of debris in there, so we're just cleaning that out. Okay, cool. Got that. Now I am running out of pins, unfortunately, because before I left England, I purchased a load of pins, but obviously they're in shipping, and I haven't purchased any since moving here. I've got a few left. I'm going to use that one. That's only bent in the middle, so I'll use that one again. Same as that one. You know, you could also use brass rod. A lot of people use brass rod because it's quite malleable. So if you're not 100% sure where your final position needs to be, as long as you get it roughly in the right location, you can then use the brass rod to bend it into position. And you can still with this stuff, but it's just a little bit tougher, which, you know, is not a bad thing. Some people use paper clips. So if you don't have pins or panel pins or nails or any brass rod, you can use paper clips, but they're not that strong. So maybe if you're pinning maybe a bolter in place or a backpack or a jump pack or something like that, that's a good application for that. But anything structural, not so much. So like if you're gluing a contemptor to a resin base or a marine or a dramatic pose or something, probably not so much. I'm only going to put 3 in here because I need to conserve pins, but if I wasn't, I'd probably use 5 in total, but I just don't have the resources right now. Yeah, happy with the direction that's going. So only one of my pins hit, that's fine. So we'll drill that one out first. Now my pins are a little shorter this time. It's always good to get rid of that swarf rather than trying to do the whole thing in one, because it does clog the hole a little bit, because it can't obviously get rid of all the the swarf in there. So it does help. There you go, perfect. Now I'm in the perfect position to push the next two in. So the top one's pushed in nicely and the bottom one as well, I can see. So that's good. I would always recommend drilling a deeper hole than you need, because if for whatever reason you've just judged it slightly wrong, or it's a couple mil too short and you've already glued it and you haven't test fitted it, it will just, you've got to pull it back out and start all over again, and it's just a nightmare. So you always drill it a little bit deeper than you actually need. Yeah, I know that that'll fit. Dosh it on the full length of that pin. Apply some pressure. Don't bend the pins like I've just done, idiot. Okay, recovered good there. Oh, there we go. That went in with a nice satisfying click. Okay, so now make sure everything is in line. It's pretty good, you know. I can also see as well that because I've pushed this up, let's get a little pointer, shall we? Because I've pushed this line up against each other, this bottom base here dips off to an edge. So it goes along and then dips off. So I know I need to sand that now. You can maybe be able to see it in the camera. It's very slight, but it makes a huge difference. It dips off that way. So I'm going to use my little sander just to sand that flat a little bit. So when I pop it down, it sits quite nicely. But also, whilst I'm here, I'm just going to chop away some of this debris that comes with the base. Not too much of it, but I am going to add some more later, but I just want to take a little bit off. The reason why I'm taking so much off, well, not so much, but a little bit around the doorway, is because I want to add my own. I want to try and heap it up a little bit like we do with the sand on the models. So I'm just trying to do that. So if I add mine, if I'd left that on there and then add my bits on top of it, it just would have been a huge heap of it. So I just want to try and just chop some of that back, which I've done, which is beautiful. Now we'll just give this a little bit of a hoover. Just hoovered up my pen lid there, which isn't very good. Anyway, let's move on. All right, back to the model. God, it's taken ages. Okay. Just making sure now we're happy. Now look, I've cut the wrong angle on this. That's not cool, is it? That is not good at all. So what I'll have to do now is I'll have to go back when I fit this on top and just fill that out with some rock and sand. You'll never see it, it'll be fine. But I just cut the wrong angle at it. So that's not very good. Do you know what? Now I've moved it. The angle is right, but I'll try and get a shot to show you that. But I need to cut more off it actually. There you go. Best laid plans and all that. So I don't know if you can see that, but it just needs correcting. I'll get a photo and overlay it. But I just need to chop that off there. So that'll take seconds, no problem. And again, I'm just going to use my tape just to get this right now. Okay, I've used my knife now because I'll be able to keep the tape in place and then chop it down. It'll be a lot easier to see, and hopefully I won't have to recut it after that as well. So obviously a bit trickier now because obviously the whole thing's together, but you know, I might not have got the final fit otherwise. I know roughly where I need to go. That's pretty good. I just need a tiny little sand. All right, hopefully this will be the last fit. There it is. That is bang on. Perfect. Now I did mention it does lean a little bit, but I'm not going to adjust that until we come to the final fitting when we do the detail. But that is in and done. I'm really happy with how that fits along there now. So that's great stuff. Right, next, this is the tricky part, okay? We have got to glue this or get it ready for gluing to go on top of our model. Now, I've thought of lots of ways to do it. The easiest way is to drill a hole, stick some 1mm panel pins in, just like I've done here, and then drill those holes after making the marks and screwing it in. However, I'm worried because I know I'm clumsy that this will just get knocked off and it will just get torn off and then the whole thing will just go in the bin. So I need to future-proof this to make sure that it's proofed against my clumsiness, which is always a good thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive just some normal wood screws into the bottom of this terrain. Then I'm going to mark it using the tape method, using the paint method, which I talked about earlier, and then we'll drill those holes. And then we'll leave it there ready for when we build the plasticard top, and then we'll glue it all in place then. So we're just literally prepping everything ready so it all slots together really nicely. So first things first, I've decided I'm just going to go into the 4 columns. I'm not worried about these bits at the end. The 4 columns will provide enough support that we need, and I'm obviously going to screw these in this way. Now, I'm going to use just the drill bit I used earlier for piloting the holes for the bits there. So roughly in the middle, you know, doesn't have to be perfect. Again, if you haven't got, you know, a cordless drill, you can use a Dremel. Failing that, you'd have to use but it's finding a drill bit wide enough to, a collet rather, that will fit a drill bit. So probably gone down 100mm. Oh, there's a massive hole there. I tell you what, let's use that. There's a massive hole in this already. It might not take the screw. Let's just double check, make sure. Yeah, it won't take the screw. So I'm going to have to drill it a little bit off to one side. Perfect. Okay, that is good. Let's have a little clean up. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to screw these in like so. I don't want to go too deep with them. I still want to leave quite a bit left out, so it'll give me something to put this 2-part epoxy in. But they still need to go in a little bit to take. So we just need to find, might screw it in my hands. No, I can't do it. All right, so we'll get our drill. I think that's about right. It's about halfway, I think. It's quite nice, that. And again, we're always trying to get these as level as possible. So if you want to get too technical, you can use your calipers on there. We've got 7mm protruding from the base. Now, we already know that this isn't the most perfectly flat base in the world. So I'm just going to judge it by eye. That's incredibly annoying. Oh, that's bang on. We like that. That's good. I think I've gone a bit too deep with that. Giggity. Ooh, needs to go down a little bit. Ideally, I'd have a square-headed screwdriver, but these are screws designed for using with with power tools. In an ideal world, there'll be a crosshead, and I can just screw them down with a screwdriver. It'd be a lot easier, but I haven't got any. I think they're called Torx head. If you're a builder or carpenter, you'll know that. Ooh, 6.5, yeah, that'll do. I'm not gonna argue over 1/2 mil. Pretty good. All right, get rid of that. Next, we'll bring our model back into position. Now, this is always tricky because we need to line it up. You know, 6-7 mil off where we would normally have it. So I'm quite happy with where it is. Now, we'll talk about the little paint method, which I talked about. So we'll just get a dollop of red paint. Always lick your brush, always helps. We'll just put a nice dollop or a dosh. That's the word I've been using. Don't know why I've discovered the word dosh all of a sudden. When dollop is perfectly adequate. Lovely. Oh, that is perfect. Now, before we commit, we've got to try and get it in first time. Right, I'm quite happy with that. And quite happy with that. Oh, it did move actually. All right, well, we've dragged it a little bit. We know the final position. Oh, that's quite annoying. So because it wasn't perfectly straight, my screws weren't quite the same level. There we go. That'll solve it. Yeah, I'm not crazy about that method actually. I know a lot of people use it, but I'm not overly crazy about it. It has worked, however. All right, and then all we need to do now is find a much thicker drill bit, which is the diameter of our screw head. And then we don't want to go too deep, but we need to make sure it's gone deep enough. God, it's really vague about where it is on here. I messed it up so many times. Okay, this middle one is slightly out, but that's okay. We can modify that. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect because we are cladding this, so we're not too worried about it. Okay, that one as well is slightly out. You know, the other thing I want to show you as well is that, you know, model building isn't a precise art. You know, it's, you know, you can't build it all in a CAD program and push a button and it does it. I mean, I know that's 3D printing, but it doesn't give the same effect. The effect is still good, but, you know, getting stuff on this scale, you know, there's a lot of enjoyment to be had out of just producing a model the traditional way, I guess. But also, you know, I'm not a professional model builder. I'm just a guy with an idea that thinks he knows what looks cool, you know, and this is what I'm trying to prove to you is that you don't need to be a model building genius to think logically and get it all in. And, you know, you are going to make mistakes like I've just done twice in a row here. So, but it's all fixable because you know that you've got a layer to go on here. You can sand it flat. It'll all fit. And then when you come to do that final fitting, boom, it's in perfectly. You know, a lot of these videos online, they just show you how to do everything absolutely perfectly. And then you think, well, God, I ended up nowhere near in the same place as that guy did or that person did online. So, you know, I think it's really important that, you know, a lot of models that look good in the end probably started off really rough. So, this is case in point. And I'm conscious as well is that people don't show their mistakes. They only show the perfect end result, which, you know, is good, but at the same time, it's unrealistic. It just doesn't happen perfect all the time. It's pretty good. I've actually, the hole for this side is just slightly too much this way, so I'm just going to flog it out a little bit more. Now, the easiest way to have fixed this was to get a much bigger drill bit, and then you can just fill it with epoxy. But I don't have a bigger drill bit. That is the biggest one I have in my collection. So We've got to persevere. But do you know what? It is there. Now it does lean a little bit because we talked about that, but once it's been clad in 2mm styrene and then the epoxy has been poured down the hole and it's glued in place, it will be absolutely solid and it will be upright as well, which will be perfect. I'm just going to have a look at the top down for myself. Yeah. There it is. That is the end of part 1. Now I know there's a lot of work that's gone in there, but I don't think it's out of anyone's reach. I think it's a really easy model to build, if I'm honest with you. And it's like I said before, you don't have to use a CNC machine. You don't have to use power tools. You can use Foamex. You can use cardboard even, because we're going to clad it anyway. As long as you've got really good, strong cardboard, you'll be absolutely fine. Again, I'm only using a CNC machine in NDF is because I need repeatability and I need time. I need some time back, so it's easy for me to just push a button and it does all the work. But I've still got to do all the planning and all the prep work which you've seen me do. So I'm really happy with how I'm leaving this at the first stage. The next thing to do now will be to put on the plasticard. I'm going to clad the entire thing in plasticard. And then we'll move on to the detailing of the building structure behind on the floor there, which I talked about. And then we'll put some damage and we'll put some, debris and various bits and bobs. We'll put some road details on there as well. So lots to do, but I think it's a really good project which you can do over the course of a month and have a really good end result and have somewhere to put your models on. And because I'm building it in such a way, if you're collecting Mechanicum 1 month and Solar Auxilia the next, or Space Brains or Orcs or Eldar, if you're into 40k, whatever, it will still work if you're playing 30k or 40k, it does not matter. Right, I know it's been a long video. I'm glad you stuck with me. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you found it interesting. There will be a complete tool list underneath of everything that I've used today. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in part 2.